Well, hi there. Welcome back to Her Shrink Ray Eye. I'm Joan, and today I want to talk about something I noticed right away when I first started going to miniature figure shows. Where are the women? For me, this seems like a missing side of the hobby. It's a topic that's close to my heart. I'm a woman who finds incredible joy in this hobby, but I've always wondered why there aren't more women participating in the more social aspects of the hobby, like shows and seminars. Maybe there are more women than we think, and they're just enjoying the hobby quietly, like I do much of the time at home. But the visible side of the hobby, it's still very male-dominated. So you may ask, why do we even care if more women are involved? I've heard for years that this or that aspect of the hobby is dying off, and so far it's not dead yet, but maybe if more women were interested and included in the hobby, it would mean we get different perspectives, which can help push innovation, broader range of styles, a bigger customer base for hobby manufacturers, and more show attendees. These all seem like positives to me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this isn't a simple question. There isn't just one answer. It's complicated. So I started investigating. Some of the information that I ran across as I was searching for possible answers to this mystery was interesting. I didn't find that one answer to explain why there are not more women involved in our hobby or some magic solution, but there are some reasons that made sense to me that could be contributing factors to low female participation in our hobby. Is the gender gap more systemic? Does it affect the art world in general, or is it just limited to miniatures? When you zoom out and look at the broader art world, there are some widespread gender disparities. I found some eye-opening statistics from the National Museum of Women in the Arts. Only about 13.7% of living artists represented by galleries in North America and Europe are women. Picasso's paintings alone made $6.23 billion at auction since 2008. All women artists combined made about the same. All women artists combined. Wow, let that sink in for a minute. And finally, about 87% of artists in permanent museum collections of 18 prominent U.S. art museums are men. That's a huge disproportionate amount of artists that are men compared to women. This imbalance also persists in art galleries and art fairs, much smaller scale than museums, but still very significant. In this account, only 39% of sales were by women. Art fairs in particular represent a very important sector of the art world, which I didn't realize until I started researching this question. In 2018, 27,000 artists showed their work at art fairs, with sales totaling $16.5 billion. Only 24% of these were women. Another article I looked at, published in May of this year by an art organization in the Netherlands called MoMA, gender bias in the art world has roots that are centuries old, where women were legally and socially restricted from becoming artists. They go on to describe the modern art market, which began in the early 1900s, as perpetuating the male dominance in both museums, galleries, art fairs, and auctions. This has taken a toll on women artists psychologically. As a common theme in interviews mention imposter syndrome, burnout, and invisibility. There's also a media bias in art journalism, where often women artists receive less comprehensive analysis, and stories often focus on gender and personal life rather than more formal innovation in the arts. It is possible that some gender gaps from the fine art world spill over into miniatures as a hobby. It is at least something interesting to consider. There are women creators, painters, sculptors, and model builders throughout the hobby, but I've observed in general there are fewer women than men in leadership roles, for one thing. Even though leadership in major hobby organizations and shows is very dominated by men still, there are some notable exceptions, like Margot Krombeek from the Scale Model Challenge show in the Netherlands and Penny Meyer from Verco's Vault, which may indicate there's a slow change happening. Hopefully this is the case. As in mainstream visual arts, systemic gender biases, subject matter expectations, institutional gatekeeping, visibility, and collector partiality to certain artists, styles, and subject matter can shape participation. There were some interesting ideas at the end of the MoMA article that talked about what could make a difference for women artists. Most of the suggestions do not really apply to our hobby per se, but I thought there were a couple of very interesting ideas that we could at least think about in terms of miniatures and scale modeling. The first is leadership. While the article is referencing leadership in museums, galleries, and auction houses, this could apply to our hobby in the form of having more women taking a leading role in hobby organizations, social media groups, and workshops. Another area that they talked about was collecting and philanthropy. I've not really had much experience with collectors in our hobby, but as I consider those that I have met or know about, all of them are men. I know some women, including myself, who collect one or two items here and there, but I would not be considered a collector. It is interesting when you think about it, but I don't know of any place or list of collectors in our hobby. It's really hard to tell exactly what the demographics are. And the final suggestion that the MoMA article talked about that I want to mention is mentorship and residency programs. Again, an area that's not a one-to-one correlation, but could be an interesting idea. And maybe we need more mentors that are women. Maybe we need more workshops taught by women. Most shows these days incorporate some sort of workshops or presentations, sometimes panel talks, and it may be possible to reach out to more women artists to provide some of these opportunities. These are interesting things to think about. Whether they would have an impact on bringing more women into the hobby is a question that doesn't have a concrete answer, but may be worth pursuing. Another question to ask yourself is, could cultural conditioning and marketing be a factor? I found some interesting research on this, but I don't think, again, it explains everything. Let's talk about the toys and hobbies we're handed as kids. Boys often get tanks, planes, cars, battleships. Girls, they get dolls, crafts, and cute things. Nothing wrong with that, but it might mean that miniature war machines or historical kits just never crossed our paths as children. I would have loved the challenge of an airbrush and a Sherman tank, but no one ever handed me one. There are some historical and cultural gender norms that seem to persist in leisure and hobbies. Hobbies like plastic modeling and miniature figure painting have been marketed more towards men and boys, at least in the roots of the hobby. There has been an emphasis on the military and war aspect of the hobby, and that even occurs in other genres like fantasy and science fiction. These subjects traditionally attract more men than women, and women and girls can sometimes be discouraged from participating in traditionally male hobbies. Cultural conditioning can also push girls and women away from pursuits that are associated with technical precision and tools like scale modeling and figure painting. We also see this in academic areas like computer programming, engineering, and math. Women are making progress in these areas from 8% in 1970 to about 27% being represented in these fields now. Women and girls are often stereotypically pushed more towards hobbies like paper crafts and needlework and academic areas like education and literature. It does not mean that women don't enjoy military and war subjects or that they don't like precision tools, but they may not have grown up around them or been encouraged to take up these types of pursuits. And yet, women are serving in the military, restoring motorcycles, working on cars, fixing machines, in other words, doing all kinds of things with technical skill. It's not a matter of capability. It may just be about exposure and access. In my experience, I wasn't aware of the hobby as a kid or a young adult, but I'd always had an interest in history, miniatures, tools, and machines. It could be as simple as more women than men don't know anything about our hobby as they grow up. I think we all grow up with varying degrees of cultural conditioning, and this may or may not be changing. I do think there is a slow shift where women and girls are more interested in technical hobbies like scale modeling, and that there is not an expectation that they pursue only stereotypical activities. I love it when I see pictures of dads and uncles and grandfathers building models with their daughters, nieces, and granddaughters. I think these girls may be more likely to pick up the hobby later or stick with it as they have grown up around people who enjoy the hobby. I mean, it's just part of their life. Historical is also not the only genre in the hobby where there are factors at play that may be discouraging for women and girls. In fantasy and science fiction, women are often sexualized or objectified in many of the figures available. And this is just not that appealing to many women and girls. And for some people, it's just plain alienating and offensive. I paint fantasy figures myself, and not all of them sexualize or objectify women, so it's not a complete deterrent, but it's worth thinking about. With the advent of 3D printing and the availability of subject matter of all kinds, I think choices improve for everyone. Again, this points to subject matter not being the main obstacle, but that it may be part of a more complex system of marketing and gender stereotypes. Let's consider another question. Could free time be a factor in women's participation in the hobby? I read an article that brought up a theory about women and time-intensive hobbies I'd never even considered before, and that's free time. According to the Office for National Statistics, women still do about 60% more unpaid work than men. And unpaid work in this context is household work like cooking and cleaning, childcare, elder care, and volunteer work. According to the study, this reduces the amount of available leisure time that women have for time-intensive pursuits. They may be more likely to get into hobbies that they can get done in a few minutes. Less leisure time for women also occurs across all ages, ethnicities, and socioeconomic conditions. Miniature painting and scale modeling can be time intensive. Again, this could be a contributing factor, although I think having less leisure time is also true for both men and women who have young children, aging parents, or stressful jobs. It's just another piece of this complicated puzzle. Are community dynamics a factor? Another reason women don't participate more might be community atmosphere. For some women, entering a male-dominated space, whether it's a contest room, a workshop, or a hobby shop, can feel very unwelcoming or intimidating. I've walked into hobby shops and been completely ignored until I was ready to pay, where if I ask a question, they look at my husband when they answer. It's not hostile, but it's noticeable, and it's more than a little aggravating. Then there's visibility. Fewer women instructors, speakers, show attendees, judges, editors, and admins in modeling groups means fewer role models for women. It becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. It's very difficult to track numbers unless you're an admin of a hobby group, but just by perusing members, it becomes very clear that most groups are predominantly men, and the admins and moderators are also overwhelmingly male. When group conversations are 90 to 100% male, topics and tone may unintentionally be slanted in that direction, leaving women out. This can have the effect of women not sticking around as the conversations and communities never really normalize their presence and excludes or minimizes their lone voices. What does the data say when it comes to shows and awards, which is one of the most visible aspects of our hobby and one of the most social aspects? I tried to get some actual numbers, which is way harder than it should be. Most shows don't publicly track demographics. In fact, none of the shows that I could see online do, but some post their award lists publicly, but generally not in a format which is good for data analysis. It's super time-consuming to format data for analysis. I only had the patience to format data for 5 shows. This is a small subset of data, but enough to draw some conclusions, I think. Show awards only tell us how many women put figures or models into the competition portion of the show. We can make some assumptions based on this, and again, the data illustrates that miniature figure painting and scale modeling are very male-dominated. In this data set, women also enter some categories more than others, which I kind of figured myself that this was the case, but it was interesting to actually see it in black and white in the data. In most of the shows I looked at, women have almost no participation in the ordnance categories. For example, in the Military Modeling Society of Illinois and the Miniature Figure Collectors of America shows, where I looked at 4 years of data, there were virtually no awards in ordnance given to a woman for the entire 4 years that I looked at the data, which I thought was interesting. I was expecting at least maybe 1 or 2, but there were none. Women do seem to be more active in certain categories. From the data, it looks like women are participating more in the juniors, fantasy painters, historical painters, storytelling, and interestingly, historical open. The data I analyzed is just a snapshot. It's not a perfect data set, but it does provide us a sample of data that we can look at. The first show I looked at was the Military Modeling Society of Illinois. The acronym is MMSI. From 2021 to 2024. The average medals awarded across the 4 years were 251, and 4% on average went to women. There was a slight bump up in 2023 and 2024. I also reviewed results from the Miniature Figure Collectors of America, the MFCA show in Philadelphia, from 2022 to 2025, averaging 209 awards, with an average of 6.9% of the awards going to women artists. I wanted to look at a larger European show. So I looked at public data for Scale Model Challenge for 2024. And this show presented about 942 awards, and 8.6% of these were awarded to women artists, which is really good, I think. But again, this show is 2 to 3 times the size of MMSI and MFCA. A show that's closer to home here in Salt Lake City was the Rocky Mountain Hobby Expo, and I looked at data for 2025. There were 107 awards presented, and 2.8% of these were received by women. And finally, just to mix things up, I wanted to look at a large show that has participation that is heavily skewed towards plastic models. So I looked at public data for the International Plastic Modeling Society, or IPMS, Nationals for 2025. And out of 614 awarded models, 1.6% were presented to women. All the shows use some form of gold, silver, or bronze judging, except for the IPMS Nationals, which uses a 1, 2, 3 system of judging. For the gold, silver, bronze shows, it's not a matter of women losing out to men, because in that system of judging, if there's 30 gold medals, then there's 30 gold medals. It's interesting that there's no limit on the amount of medals given for a category, whereas a show like IPMS with the 1, 2, 3 system, there is, you're limited to 3. I did my very best to determine male versus female names, which can be difficult at times. So when I was unsure, I would do a Google search and see if that name was more likely, more often, a man or a woman. And then if it wasn't clear, I would try and search the person on social media when I was unsure. I also didn't count special show awards in the data. It seems that shows where participation is mostly plastic models, like the Rocky Mountain Hobby Expo and the IPMS Nationals, they have the lowest percentages of women entering the competition and winning awards. It looks like there is a lot more participation of women in shows that are heavily oriented towards figures. Another interesting thing that I looked at shows were some shows have special honors for people who have consistently participated and brought very high quality work over a number of years. MMSI has the Chicago Medal, and MFCA has the Grand Master Award. Women make up only 5% and 3% of those awarded, respectively. We need to get more women out there, because that's a great role model to see women get those high awards. I think overall the data indicates that participation by women in shows is generally low, with the highest percent occurring in 2025 at the MFCA show, with 10% of medals awarded going to women, which is fantastic. Well, this is a bright spot, and this bright spot has a lot to do with a group from France called Les Enfants de l'Aigle, which translates to the Children of the Eagle. And they are doing amazing work supporting children's hospitals and women artists. They've helped bring in more participation and visibility and have presented a special award for a woman at each of these two shows. I think they've had a really positive influence in the increase of women artists we've seen in the last couple of years at both MMSI and MFCA, and the data backs it up. There are more in those years where the Children of the Eagle have been coming to the show. There's a greater percentage of women artists participating and getting medals. Shows are just one part of this. Beyond the competition part of the shows, there are still areas where women are not participating as much as men, and that's in judging, seminars, and workshops. Women are definitely underrepresented as judges. It's very hard to find statistical data, and many organizations do not publish their list of judges. And if they do, they don't have years and years of data available publicly. From my own experience, when I've judged at shows, there are very few women judges. It's just what I've seen. I looked at some published data for SMC for 2025, and their list of judges does show that 6.5% of them are women. It's a pretty small number. World Model Expo, one of the largest model shows that we have, and that occurs every 3 years. That was in Versailles this year in July, and their list of judges showed that 7.4% of their judging teams were made up of women. Interestingly enough, there were very, very few women judges in the ordinance. I think there was only one. Workshops show a little more promise. SMC this year has 27% of their workshops led by women. That's awesome. Verco's Vault in Las Vegas, that's a miniature museum, and they hold artist workshops very regularly, at least once a month. And about 14% of their past and future instructors are women. That's great. Smaller shows, though, may just not have the resources to present enough seminars and workshops to include a large variety of presenter. So those tend to be mostly male. And a lot of smaller shows only have 1, 2, 3, or 4 seminars or workshops. But this kind of visibility matters. When women see other women in leadership, teaching, or expert roles, it makes a difference, and it can inspire them to either take up the hobby or participate more. I know for me, it's incredibly inspiring to see women who are leading in the hobby, who have the highest awards. I mean, one of my role models is Penny Meyer, and she's done all of these things. She's a great inspiration to, I'm sure, more than just me. So, where are the women? Some are here, some are watching, some are painting quietly at home. Some entered as juniors and left, but haven't found the entry point back in. But many more might join us if they felt fully included. Not just welcomed, but expected, recognized as great modelers and artists without novelty or gender qualifiers. It's not about tokenism. Studies suggest that underrepresentation begins to shift when a group reaches about 15 to 30% visibility. That's when you stop being the only one and start being just one of many. Women don't need to be added to a panel just to check a box. We need to be judges, workshop leaders, editors, featured artists, the people shaping the hobby itself. We need to be a part of that. It's not just about representation, it's about belonging. And as much as people say, we need more young people in the hobby, I find myself wanting to add, yes. And we also need more women. After all, in 2025, women make up nearly half the world's population, 49.7%, in fact. That's more than 4 billion stories, perspectives, and talents we're missing out on if we don't open the door in our hobby a little wider. We may not have a clear answer to where all the women are in this hobby, but I hope I've given you something to think about. Maybe even a reason to look around and wonder what it would be like if the room looked just a little different. Maybe just by asking, by noticing, by talking about it, we make a little more room for someone who hasn't found their place here yet. If you're organizing a show, curating a panel, or running a hobby group, maybe ask yourself, whose voice haven't I heard from yet? I don't have all the answers. I don't even have a single answer. But hopefully we've all thought about it, and maybe we'll be a little bit more aware. Maybe we'll see more women coming into the hobby, which can only be seen as a positive. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, follow, or just carve out a little time to listen. I'll be right here with my lamp on, brush in my hands, story waiting. Until next time, keep your hands steady, see clearly, nod obediently, and keep your story your own. Thanks for listening.